Germany has a reputation for being an orderly country, a country where the trains run on time, where people sort their trash into 7 different bins, and where nobody crosses on a red light even if there isn't a car for miles in any direction. And then you sit down at their table and you find out that order is a lie. That underneath the tablecloth there's a war as old as the country, older even. Because Germany as a nation is barely a day old, but its sausages have been at each other's throats since the Middle Ages. Nobody here agrees on anything. They can't agree on what to call a meatball. They can't agree on whether a pork knuckle is boiled or roasted. And they absolutely cannot agree on what time of day you're allowed to eat a white sausage without being looked at like a criminal. Germany doesn't have a cuisine. It's got a peace treaty nobody ever signed, served with a side of potato. And to understand the full scale of the disaster, you have to start in Berlin, because that's where the most famous sausage in the country lives, and also one of the most ridiculous, said with all the love in the world. The currywurst. A pork sausage, fried or griddled, sliced into rounds, drowned in tomato sauce with curry powder dusted on top, and served in a little cardboard tray with a wooden fork and, if you're lucky, a bread roll on the side for mopping. It sounds like something you'd feed a toddler, and basically it is, except here it's eaten by grown adults in long coats at 11 in the morning on their way to work, standing up at a street stall with that German dignity fully intact like they're signing a contract. Legend says it was invented by a woman, Herta Heiver, in the bombed-out Berlin of 1949, mixing ketchup and curry that some British soldiers had given her. It's even got its own memorial plaque and its own museum, which closed because even a museum dedicated to a sausage with ketchup has a limit to its audience. And here comes the first national squabble, because the Ruhr, that industrial region out west, also claims the currywurst as its own, as miners' food. And in Bochum, they'll tell you the Berlin one is a fraud. 2 regions fighting over the authorship of a sausage with curry powder on it. Welcome to Germany. And now that we've opened the can of worms that is German sausage, which in this country is less a can of worms and more a minefield, we have to talk about the bratwurst, because the bratwurst isn't a sausage, it's 400 sausages pretending to be the same one and hating each other. The bratwurst is the grilling sausage, pork, sometimes veal, spiced according to region, and every town, every city, every valley has its own, and is absolutely convinced all the others are a scam. The Nürnberger one is tiny, about the size of a finger, and on top of that it's got protected origin status from the European Union, which means there are bureaucrats in Brussels whose actual job is making sure nobody makes a Nürnberg sausage outside Nürnberg. They're sold 6 at a time, or 8, or 10, tucked into a roll, and with the Nürnberger you can cram 3 into a bun and call it lunch. The Thüringer one, on the other hand, is long and fat, and the people of Thuringia will tell you theirs is documented back to the 16th century and that it's the real one, the mother of them all. And then there's the ritual, which is what actually matters, because the sausage is grilled over charcoal, never over gas if you ask a purist, and eaten with mustard, and if you put ketchup near it in front of a true Thuringian his vision goes cloudy. The bratwurst is proof that in Germany you can fit an entire civil war inside one length of pig intestine. But if you think the bratwurst is intense, wait until you meet the Weißwurst, the white sausage of Bavaria, which isn't a sausage, it's a religion with office hours. It's made in Munich, from veal and pork fat, parsley, lemon and cardamom, poached in hot water and coming out that pale, sickly white that scares you the first time. And here's the good part, because the Weißwurst has an unwritten rule that Bavarians defend with their lives. It must never hear the noon bells ring. Seriously. Tradition says that since there was no refrigeration, the sausage had to be eaten before midday, freshly made, and from that came the rule that the Weißwurst is only ever eaten in the morning, for breakfast, with sweet mustard, a Brezel, and a wheat beer, because a beer at 10 in the morning in Bavaria isn't alcoholism, it's folklore. And that's not all. You don't eat the skin. You suck it, or cut it, or peel it. But biting into a Weißwurst with the skin on in front of a Bavarian is like sneezing inside a church. There's even a verb for the ritual of slurping it out, zuzeln. A sausage with a schedule, a dress code and its own verb. And even so, when a Bavarian sits down to breakfast on 2 of these bobbing in their hot water, he does it with a devotion that's almost moving. Because to him that isn't a meal, it's his flag. And speaking of flags, let's get to the food that actually holds Germany upright. The one eaten at 4 in the morning stumbling out of a bar. The one that never shows up in the traditional cookbooks but is, without argument, the country's real national dish. The Döner Kebab. And yes, I know what you're thinking, that the doner is Turkish. And it is, and it isn't, and that's the beauty of it. The doner as you know it today, The meat off the vertical spit stuffed into a pita with salad, yogurt sauce, red cabbage, and those strips of onion. That specific version was invented in Berlin, in the 70s, by Turkish immigrants who adapted the kebab of their homeland to the hunger and the hurry of the German city. Berlin claims paternity of the modern doner with pride. And Turkey, understandably, rolls its eyes, because meat on a vertical spit has been turning in Anatolia since the 19th century. It's the perfect dispute. An immigrant dish that a country adopts as its own, while the country of origin says, hey, that's been mine forever. And while the two of them argue, there are millions of Germans of every background eating one every weekend without a second thought, which in the end is the only sane way to settle a food war, by eating it. And since we're on breaded meat adapted from abroad, which is half of Germany, we have to wade into the mud of the Schnitzel, which is flat out an international incident. The Schnitzel is a cut of meat pounded flat with a mallet until it's thin as a sheet of paper, dredged in flour, egg, and breadcrumbs, and fried until golden and crisp. And the king of them all, the Wiener Schnitzel, the Viennese one, has a problem for Germans. It's Austrian. It's from Vienna. It says so right in the name. And by Austrian law, a real Wiener Schnitzel is made with veal, only veal. And if you make it with pork, you have to call it Schnitzel Wiener Art, meaning Viennese style, which is the legal way of saying knockoff. And here the Germans, who eat tons of pork schnitzel because it's cheaper, live in that eternal limbo of eating one thing while calling it almost, but not quite, the original. And on top of that there's the Jäger Schnitzel, the Hunter Schnitzel, with its mushroom sauce, which in the former East Germany was something else entirely, a slice of fried bologna. And to this day, an Easterner and a Westerner can argue for half an hour about what a Jäger Schnitzel really is. A breaded cutlet that manages to pit two countries and the two halves of a third against each other. German efficiency. And if you thought Bavaria and Swabia were going to keep quiet, you don't know the Swabians, because now it's the Pretzel's turn. The Brezel, that twisted knot of dough, golden and salted, which is probably the most recognizable edible symbol in the country. It's made with a dough that gets dunked in diluted lye before baking, which is what gives it that glossy mahogany color and that distinctive crust flavor. And yes, you heard right, lye, the same stuff you unclog drains with, only in a controlled amount, and baked it becomes harmless and delicious. Bavaria claims it as its own, with its fat pretzel with thin arms and a thick belly that gets eaten with the Weißwurst. But Swabia claims it too, and the Swabian pretzel has thicker arms and a different cut. And to a Swabian, the Bavarian does it wrong. And to a Bavarian, the Swabian hasn't got a clue. And they agree on exactly one thing, that there's a legend about a baker sentenced to death, whom a nobleman spared on the condition that he make a bread you could see the sun through 3 times. And that's where the 3 holes of the knot come from. A twist of dough with a death sentence at its origin, and a border war in its present. And now that we've landed in Swabia, let's stay a while, because the Swabians, on top of arguing about pretzels, have 2 weapons of mass destruction of their own. The first is Spätzle, those short, irregular egg noodles, made by scraping a soft batter straight into boiling water, that come out with that rustic little worm shape no machine ever quite copies. And when you melt cheese over them and pile fried onions on top, they become Käsespätzle, which is the closest thing Germany has to a hug. But the true Swabian jewel, the one that best captures this country, is the Maultasche, a kind of enormous ravioli stuffed with meat, spinach, and bread. And why is it so German? Because of its nickname. The Swabians call it Herrgottsscheissele, which translates roughly as the Little Lord Cheater. The story goes that the monks wanted to eat meat during Lent, when it was forbidden, so they minced it and hid it inside the dough so God wouldn't see it. An entire people who invented a dish specifically to cheat God, and have been eating it for centuries, proud of how clever they were. That, more than any sausage, tells you exactly who they are. And since we're talking about things that aren't what their names promise, we have to stop at the Leberkäse, which is a textbook case of linguistic fraud. Translated literally, it means liver cheese. And there's no cheese in it, and often there's no liver either. It's a loaf of finely minced meat, pork and beef, baked in a rectangular tin until a golden crust forms on the outside and it stays pink and firm inside. And it's sliced thick and stuffed into a roll with mustard, and that's a Leberkäsemel, the sandwich that keeps half of Bavaria going at mid-morning. When you ask a Bavarian why it's called liver cheese if it has neither, he shrugs with the serenity of a man who has decided that logical questions are a foreigner's problem. There are theories that it comes from an old word for loaf, that it's from the Rhine region. Nobody knows for sure, and nobody seems to care, because they're too busy eating it.
And let me stop you here for a second.
Because this is the point in the meal where, if this were a real dinner, someone would get up to grab more beer and take the chance to ask you to hit like and subscribe to the channel. So, I'll do it myself, with the same indifference a German uses to tell you your potato salad is made wrong. If you're enjoying this rundown, subscribe, hit like, and while you're at it, drop in the comments whether a pork knuckle is boiled or roasted, because I know full well you have an opinion and that you're itching to fight about it. I'll just leave it there, like the guy who mentions at the table that he put vinegar in the potato salad in front of a Bavarian and sits back to see who jumps. Because someone's going to jump. Someone always jumps. And speaking precisely of dinner table fights, let's head to the Rhine, to Cologne and its surroundings, for the Sauerbraten, which is beef marinated for days, sometimes a full week, in a mix of vinegar, wine, water, and spices, until it goes so tender and so tangy it nearly falls apart, and then it's braised slow and served with a dark, sweet and sour sauce that in the Rhineland version has raisins in it and is sometimes thickened with ground gingerbread. Yes, with cookies. And here's the lovely historical catch. They say the Sauerbraten was originally made with horse meat, not beef, and to this day in some corner of the Rhineland you'll find someone who defends it the old way. Marinating the meat for days on end wasn't a gourmet whim, it was the way to rescue tough or turning meat when there was nothing else, which means this elegant Sunday dish was born of pure necessity, like nearly everything we now call tradition. And the Rhinelanders love to remind you the sauce has raisins in it, and half of Germany is horrified that the sauce has raisins in it, and there you have another invisible border drawn with dried fruit. And since we've touched on slow-braised meat, it's impossible not to get into the mother of all German, North versus South fights, which is the pork knuckle, because the same cut of the animal, the leg, becomes two rival dishes depending on which side of the country you're standing on. In Bavaria and the South, it's the Schweinshaxe, and it's roasted, baked until the skin goes so crisp it makes a sound when you tap it, with the meat tender inside, and it's served with its Brezel, its beer, and its mountain of sauerkraut. In Berlin and the North, it's the Eisbein, and it's boiled, simmered until it's pale, soft, gelatinous, wobbling, with skin that's tender instead of crisp, and it's served with sauerkraut and pea puree. And make no mistake, to a Bavarian, boiling a knuckle is a criminal waste of a perfectly good pig, and to a Berliner, roasting it until it's crunchy is a southern affectation. Same leg, same pig, two religions, and each one convinced the other has been doing it wrong for centuries. And of course, the side dish that accompanies half the country has its own Cold War too, and it's the potato salad, the Kartoffelsalat, which is literally the map of Germany drawn in a bowl. In the North, it's made with mayonnaise, creamy, thick, cold, the one you'd expect. In the South, in Bavaria and Swabia, it's made without a single drop of mayonnaise, with hot broth, vinegar, oil, mustard, and onion, and served warm, lighter, and tangier. And these two potato salads do not speak to each other. A southern German who runs into a mayonnaise potato salad on Christmas Eve feels his holiday has been ruined, and a northern German who tries the warm broth version thinks they forgot to finish it. The vinegar border and the mayonnaise border cross the country in the exact same place, and every family swears grandma's recipe is the only correct one, which, like all grandma recipes, means it's correct for exactly one grandma. And from the potato to the cabbage is a single step, and the cabbage leads us straight to the dish that gave the Germans their international nickname, because Germans have been called krauts for generations, and kraut is cabbage, from the sauerkraut, the fermented cabbage. The cabbage is sliced razor thin, salted, pressed, and left to ferment for weeks until it turns sour. And that process, on top of preserving it through the winter, loads it with vitamin C, which is why German sailors weren't dropping dead of scurvy while others fell like flies. Which means the dish used as an insult is actually a feat of food engineering. It goes with the sausages, the knuckle, everything, with that acidity that cuts the fat, and every region seasons it its own way, with juniper berries, with apple, with white wine, with caraway seeds, and everyone thinks the one from their house is the good one. An entire people known to the rest of the world by a jar of pickled cabbage, and proud of it, which is the least you can do when your nickname is a vegetable. Then let's go all the way up north, to the ports, to Hamburg and Bremen, because up there the food smells of the sea and the long voyage, and the flagship dish is Labskaus, which is one of those things you have to see to believe. Picture an intense pink puree, almost fuchsia, made of minced salt beef, potato, onion and beetroot, all mashed together into a paste of an impossible color and crowned with a fried egg, gherkins, and pickled herring or rollmops on the side. It was born on the ships, sailors' food, made from whatever survived months at sea without spoiling, cured meat, and preserves, all mashed up because the older sailors with no teeth struggled to chew. It sounds ghastly, and the northerners are besotted with it, and the moment a southern German sees that pink heap, he wonders at what point the sea drove these people mad. It's ugly, it's strange, it's honest, and it tastes of the port, of salt, and of survival. which, in the end, is what almost all real food tastes of before it gets dressed up as tradition. And let's stay in the north for a ritual that's half meal and half winter sport. The greenkohl, the kale, that dark, crinkly green vegetable that in northern Germany is braised slow with smoked sausages and pork belly until it becomes a heavy, full-on midwinter dish. But the good part isn't the dish, it's the custom around it. The Kohlfahrt, the kale walk, in which groups of friends and co-workers gather to trek across the frozen countryside, pulling a little cart loaded with schnapps, playing absurd games along the way, drinking until they freeze, and ending up at an inn where they eat kilos of kale and sausage and crown a kale king based on who ate the most. A people who turned eating a vegetable into a boozy pilgrimage with its own monarchy. And if you ask them why, they look at you like the question makes no sense, because to them it doesn't. You do it because you do it, because it's cold, and because it's always been done this way. And like every good long lunch, this one starts to speed up, because there are dishes still knocking at the door, and every one of them has its own beef. So let's give them an honest run-through before the coffee goes cold. The Königsberger Klops, the meatballs of the old East Prussia, from the city that's now Russian and called Kaliningrad, pale balls of meat, boiled in a white sauce of capers and lemon. A dish from a place that no longer exists on the map the way it was. Refugee food from an erased geography. The rouladen, thin slices of beef rolled up with bacon, onion, gherkin and mustard inside. Tied and braised slow, the Sunday dish of half of Germany. And every house swears its filling is the correct one. The Flammkuchen, that kind of paper-thin crispy pizza with sour cream, onion and bacon, which comes from the border of Alsace and which France and Germany squabble over with the ease of two countries that have spent centuries shoving the border back and forth. Because Alsace has been German and French so many times that its food no longer quite knows whose it is. And honestly couldn't care less. Remember how at the start I told you this country can't even agree on what to call a meatball? And it wasn't a bit of dinner table exaggeration, it was literal. The humble German meatball. That ball or patty of minced meat with soaked bread, onion and egg, fried in the pan, changes its name every time you cross an invisible border inside the country itself. In the north and most of Germany, it's a frikadelle. In Berlin, it's a boulette, a word that arrived with the French Huguenots and that a Berliner defends like it's more his than the wall ever was. In Bavaria, it's a Fleischpflanzerl, which is frankly a different language altogether. In Hesse, they call it Klops, in other places, Frikandel. And in each of those regions, people are certain their word is the normal one, and the rest are the quirks of weirdos. It's the same meat, the same pan, the same gesture of your grandma flattening it with the edge of her hand, and yet it's impossible to order it across all of Germany with the same word without someone correcting you. A country capable of building cars with microscopic precision that hasn't managed in 1,000 years to agree on what to call a fried ball of meat. And this, more than the sausages and more than the knuckle, is the heart of the matter. Because it proves the disagreement isn't about the food, it's about who's right, which, in Germany, is always the person currently talking. And in case the savory side wasn't battlefield enough, German dessert has its borders drawn with a knife too. The Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte, the Black Forest cake, layers of chocolate sponge soaked in Kirschwasser, that cherry brandy from the region, with cream, cherries and chocolate shavings. And mind you, to actually be called that, in Germany, it has to contain the real brandy. You can't just soak it in juice and play dumb. The Stollen from Dresden, that dense, heavy Christmas bread, loaded with candied fruit and marzipan and dusted in icing sugar, so protected that only Dresden bakers can call it a real Dresdner Christstollen, with its seal and its certificate, a Christmas loaf with an ID card, and the Lebkuchen from Nuremberg, those spiced cakes halfway between a cookie and gingerbread, baked on wafers, which the city has been making since the Middle Ages when it was the crossroads of the spice routes, and which also have their protected designation, because in this country, even a Christmas cookie needs paperwork. And to close the circle, the thing that truly ties it all together, the thing that in Germany isn't a drink but a constitutional principle, the beer. And with it, the purity law, the Reinheitsgebot, decreed in Bavaria in 1516, which said beer could only be made with water, barley and hops, and that's it. More than 500 years defending the idea that you don't put anything funny in beer, with a pride that borders on the religious, while every region defends its own style. The wheat Weissbier of the South, the pale feather-light Kolsch of Cologne served in narrow little glasses, the dark Altbier of Düsseldorf, which is barely 40 kilometers from Cologne and exists basically to contradict it. Cologne and Düsseldorf, two neighboring cities, each with its own beer, each despising the others, each ordering theirs with the loyalty of a football fan. Because, in the end, Germany is this, a country that turned disagreement into tradition, and tradition into a protected designation of origin. And so, dish by dish, sausage by sausage, with its boiled knuckle fighting its roasted knuckle, its potato salad split in two by a border of mayonnaise, and its white sausage that mustn't hear the noon bells, you realize that this famously orderly country actually can't agree on a single thing it puts in its mouth. And that this is precisely why it works, because everyone defends their own like their life depends on it. Almost all of it was born from cold, from hunger, and from using up whatever was there, and even so they wave it around like flags. And well, that's how you eat it. If you've made it this far without taking offense at the raisins in the sauce thing, subscribe, hit like, and tell me in the comments which side of the potato salad you're on, because the long lunch never ends.